Hey everyone, welcome to Alta Keys. I'm Pankaj Rai, and in this video I'm going to talk about the Android interview questions. Well, these interview questions are basically focused for those who are having experience below 4 years, and if you are having experience above 4 years, then it is good to brush up your basic knowledge. So now let's get started with the part 3 of Android interview questions. The first question is, why do you want to develop Android application? Well, the prime reason could be if you want to have your use case to reach out to the global set of audience, then Android apps gives you the best platform. If you have certain things which could be beneficial for the community and you want this to reach out to the major section of the community, then this is really a good platform. What is manifest file? So manifest file have all the essential information related to the app, and this is read by the Play Store also, where on the Play Store you can see the set of permissions that this app might be requesting for. Those all are read through this manifest file. So it take care for the set of permissions that you may need in the application, the app components like activity services you specify in the manifest file, even the metadata you can specify, the intent filters, all sort of things you can specify right in the manifest file. Where do you define the dependencies? So all the dependencies are defined in the Gradle file. We have two Gradles where one is used for defining the class path and another one is used for defining all the dependencies that are required for the application. Which language is used for Gradle file? So the language used there is the Groovy language. However, you can also use the Kotlin DSL and write all sort of things like dependencies or set of instructions, all sort of things in the Kotlin language also. What is application ID in the Gradle file? So application ID acts like a unique identifier for your application. Say if you want to add the Facebook authentication or the Google authentication or any other social platform authentication, then it requires you to register your app on their platform. And at that time also it required this application ID so that it could uniquely identify your app along with the SHA key. So this is also useful for uploading app on the Play Store, because you cannot upload two apps with same application ID. It's not going to allow you to do that. So you have to take care of this thing that your application ID should be unique to what the app is doing so that you could identify them by seeing the application ID also. What is version code and version name? So changing version code and version name is something which you might see most commonly when you give your app to the testers or while uploading app on the Play Store. The prime reason for version code and version name is for versioning your application. Version code takes care of the numbers and version name is the place where you can give the string. And version name is something which you'll see on the Play Store also. Where version name, you can leave it as it is, but version code, this has to be unique all the time, which means that say if you have uploaded your app on the Play Store with the version code as 1, next time you cannot upload your application with version code as 1. You have to upload it by giving version code as 2. And it's always recommended to change version code and version name together, not leaving version name behind and just changing version code, so as to have a proper versioning for your application. What is ViewGroup? So ViewGroup is a special kind of view which in turn doesn't show anything on the screen but have a capability to align their children's. So view group, think as if it's a parent, and inside that parent you can have any number of views, and whatever characteristics given by the view group is automatically inherited by the children's. For example, linear layout. Linear layout is a view group, and the attribute that it gives you is that you can align the views inside linear layout either to the vertically or horizontally. Same way with constraint layout, you can specify based on certain constraint. Frame layout, where you can stack all of them together. So view group is really useful for doing all sort of things, and you have to use view group if you have more than one view. When to use different view group? So if you have a straightforward UI where you just have a vertical and horizontal views, then linear layout is really the best one to go ahead with. And constraint layout is useful if you have a complex view and you do not want to increase the hierarchy while creating the layout. During those scenarios, constraint layout is really helpful. Frame layout is useful for those places where you can have a stack of views, And also it gives you an ability to align them based on the gravity. So not just like aligning stack just one over the other, but you can align them based on some gravity like center, top, bottom, left, right. Relative layout is something which I strongly recommend not to use it, because whatever privilege which you are getting with the relative layout, now you get with the constraint layout also, like aligning the view with respect to other views. Then grid view is useful if you want to align the views based on certain grids. But if you want to make it dynamic, then go ahead with the recycler view with grid layout manager. Is it recommended to use relative layout? Then I would strongly say no, it's not recommended to use relative layout, because constraint layout offers much more capabilities than the relative layout, and it offers you to have a flat hierarchy as compared to relative layout. What is constraint layout? So constraint layout is one of the view group, and the major characteristics that is offered with constraint layout is you can align the views based on certain constraints. And because the set of features that it offers, you can have a literally flat hierarchy with a very complex UI also. To know more about that, I'll give link in the description where I've talked more about the constraint layout and constraint layout features. You can go through those videos. How you can animate your views. So for animation, we have the animation library, but if your target is to animate the views based on certain position like start and end position, that's transition animation, or changing the color of the view, changing the size of it, then rather than using the animation libraries, you can now use motion layout. With motion layout, you can achieve complex or the simple animation with a very minimum effort. The best thing is that you do not need to add any different dependencies than what you were already having it, because if you are creating your layout, you might already have the constraint layout dependency, and motion layout is a part of constraint layout from 2.0 onward. So if you have constraint layout 2.0 and above, you automatically have the motion layout dependencies also. Can views be created programmatically without creating them through XML? Then yes, it is possible. You can create your views programmatically also, but this is something which is not a recommended solution, because if you have a complex view, complex hierarchies, then it's really going to show you the white screen the moment you launch the application, because it need to create the views, then allocate objects for it, see the alignment of the views. So for all those things is a time consuming process, and that's going to end up with a frame drop. So the best approach is to have it in the XML whenever possible, and define it programmatically only when the XML approach is not feasible. What is ripple effect? So ripple effect is something which is an animation like a wave which you see when user touch the view. For example, you might be seeing a button. The material design button have a ripple effect by default. So the moment you tap on a button, it gives you an animation and gives a feel as if user has touched the button. And this is really good to give the feedback to the user that user has pressed the view. How you can add ripple effect. So button is something with which you get it by default, but if you want to add it, then you can add the selectable item background or selectable item borderless. If you add selectable item background, then it goes ahead with the views. Whatever boundaries that you have, it automatically adjusts based on that. And selectable item background borderless is good for having a circle ripple effect, which will cross the boundary of the views. This is good for giving the menu options, the animations for the menu option. What is drawable? So drawable is a place where you can define all sort of XMLs which you want to set it to the views, like for setting the gradients or shapes, or even the images which you're going to use it for your application. Not just this, you can also have different drawables based on device densities like MDPI, HDPIs, XDPI, all sort of things. You can have it with the drawables. What is layout? So layout is a place where you define the views which has to be rendered on the screen. So we have layout.xmls, and this layout.xmls are all about whatever you're going to inflate it to your activity or to the fragment. You can specify all of them, and the best part is that you can also specify the layout based on the device orientation like portrait or landscape mode. Why to use styles.xml? So there are most common scenarios where you'll see the same attributes for a view is used over and over. To avoid that, you can have a styles and you can just set the style. For example, say you have a button whose characteristics is always match parent for the width and wrap for height. You have a margin of 12 dp, background as say black color, and text of certain size, and then font family as certain font family. Then rather than giving this attribute over and over to all the buttons, you can specify that in the style and can set the style for the button. So by this way, you can avoid redundant work. Also, you can specify the theme in the style, and not just in the styles, you can now specify the theme in the themes folder also. You can specify the themes folder. Inside themes folder, you can have themes.xml, and there you can specify the app theme. So localization is an ability where you can specify different languages for your application. For example, you might have seen that in few of the application you'll see you can switch between the language, say English to German or to French. This can be done using localization, because for those set of languages, different strings.xml are already defined, and based on the language that you have used or selected, it's going to read from that strings.xml. App constant should be defined in class or interface. Well, app constant should be defined in the class, not in interface, and the reason is that because with class you're not able to inherit it, as Java doesn't support multiple class inheritance. And if you're using activity or fragment, it's an obvious case that you might be inheriting with the app component or with a fragment. So there's no way that you can inherit the app constant file. And the prime reason for avoiding inheritance is that if you are having a app constant with certain name, and then if you are using that same name in your activity or fragment, then there is a great chance that it may get messed up, and whatever is your objective, you may not get that. And getting this kind of error is something which is common but difficult to detect. So it's really recommended way to use constant is have it in the class file, and whenever you want to use class name dot whatever constant name you have it. For example, app constant dot username. And if you're using Kotlin, then even better, you can have it object, and inside object specify all your constant. Again, do not inherit the object directly, rather call through the object name dot whatever app constant that you have. How do you create static methods in Kotlin? So Kotlin doesn't have a static keyword. So if you want to have a static method or objects, you have to specify them inside the object or the companion object. Both create static methods and object. However, if you're using companion object, then it's really a recommended approach to use @JVM static to make them truly static. As with the JVM object, what it does is that it calls those objects or the methods using the companion object. So it creates an object, and through that object it calls those things. But if you make them as JVM static, then it directly calls them through the class name. Can Kotlin increase the size of the app or downgrade its performance? So yes, it does increase to a certain extent, and that's something which is negligible, because if you add proguard, it's less than 100 KB. If you do not do it, then it's less than 200 KB. But the set of features that it offers and the performance that it adds up is much more than the size that it is adding. So there are compile level optimization which is done when you write the code using Kotlin language, and that's going to make your app much more performant than using the Java language. What is intent? So intent is a message passing object. Through that you can interact with the various components, or you can start other components. So this is a place through that you could request certain action, either specifying implicit or explicit intents. What are the various types of intents? There are two types of intents: explicit intent and implicit intent. Explicit intent is where you specify the application which satisfies the intent by supplying either the package name or fully qualified the component names. So this is something which you will most commonly use in your application, like is starting an activity. For that you have to use explicit intent, where you specify the current activity and the next activity you want to go ahead with. Implicit intent is those intent where you do not specify the specific component. Rather, you just specify the action that you want to perform and let the system take care for you. For example, starting the camera, send SMS, or opening gallery. You just specify the intent and let the system decide how to fulfill that. So that's it for this set of interview questions. And if you have liked this video, then hit the like button and do not forget to hit the subscribe button so that you will not miss the part 4 of the Android interview questions. Thank you and stay tuned.